Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. And I would like to give a special welcome to everyone who's joining from across northern Arizona, Sedona, and Prescott, and Flagstaff. I would like to give a very special welcome to Rabbi Eli Estrin. Rabbi Eli Estrin and his wife, Chaya, are dear friends of ours. And 4 years ago, they were blessed with a beautiful baby boy. Leading up to his birth, the doctors and the medical experts warned them to expect the worst. And despite everything that they were told, they remained extremely positive, and they experienced miracle after miracle after miracle. To hear the whole story, I know it would take many, many hours. Rabbi Estrin tonight, for 45 minutes, is going to share this remarkable story, which is really a story of miracles, medicine, and mindset, which is the mindset part of it is probably the most important, because we all know that when we open ourselves up to miracles, miracles do happen. We have to be open to it. And Rabbi Estrin and Chaya Estrin opened themselves up to these miracles, and they experienced some unbelievably touching stories along the way. And he will share, Rabbi Estrin will share their beautiful story with all of us here tonight. At the end, we will open it up for questions and answers, and everyone is welcome to ask and to share. And Rabbi Estrin is very open, and he loves questions. He loves to, if anyone knows the term farbrengen, he loves to farbreng. He's always down for a good farbrengen, to share from the heart and to connect. And I'm sure he'll welcome every question, any and all questions. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Rabbi Estrin, who is a chaplain in the U.S. Navy, and U.S. Air Force, and he serves the Jews in the military. And he's a captain who is promotable to major, currently lives in North Miami Beach, Florida, which happens to be, Miami is my hometown. And again, it's a real honor to have him with us tonight. So without further ado, Rabbi Eli Estrin.
So it's truly a pleasure, and it's a pleasure sharing the story with all of you, especially with Rabbi and Mrs. Shapiro, because you were a part of the story. We'll kind of hit upon some of the things that they were involved with at some point. But I want to start with the mindsets, because the mindsets, as Rabbi Shapiro, are most important, and they're relevant to all of us. Whether or not we need a miracle, and the truth of the matter is that our world right now needs miracles big time. And these were 5 mindsets that I like to say they drove us. They got us through the entire experience. The truth of the matter is that these mindsets didn't come up, at the time, once we started going through these things. They were ideas that we thought about and we considered, and we really made part of our life beforehand. And I think that's true of every Jew, and every observant Jew, and every Chabad family. We teach these things to our children, and so we're all inculcated with these ideas. And in this particular case, we found that these things really literally saved our son's life and saved our own sanity. So the five mindsets are: number 1, that God is fully capable of doing whatever he wants. In other words, sometimes he works within the parameters of nature, but sometimes he decides not to. And that why he decides one way or the other, that's God's problem specifically. But the fact of the matter is that God is fully capable of working outside the realm of nature when God so decides. So God is fully capable, complete and absolute. Number 2 is the value of every single life. And this is really important, not just to talk about the value of life in terms of those of us who are, thank God, our minds are capable, our bodies are capable, but every single life is of infinite value, because the definition of a life is that the body and soul have been placed together. So even, God forbid, in a situation where it doesn't seem that there's any any way for us to be able to measure the value of that life, because in our human eyes, we see somebody who is incapacitated or something like that. There's still value in that. And there's not just a little bit of value, but there's infinite value. And that's an idea that we've been teaching. We taught our students at the University of Washington for many years, and it was something that we really cared about for many reasons. Most particularly, my older brother had cystic fibrosis. Not to get into his full story, but I understood the concept of sickness and value of struggle through disease and such. But there is an infinite value when the soul and body are together, and it's our job to try to protect that and to help that as much as possible. Number 3, I know we have a cardiologist here tonight, and I'm looking forward to his perspectives on the story afterwards. But we talk about medicine and the responsibility that doctors have. There's a very beautiful statement by the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, who taught that doctors were given permission by God to heal, but not to predict. So he created this mission statement that doctors have to be focused on healing as opposed to predictions. And that's a very, very important element of the way we look at medicine, that we're just focusing on what we can do to be able to heal this person as much as possible, if possible, and whenever possible. And we don't focus on how long the person has or doesn't have or anything like that into the future. The future is God's. Right now, we have to do what we humans have to do. Number 4 is the idea that think good and it'll be good. Now, that sounds very naive or simplistic, but in Hasidic philosophy, we talk about the concept that when you think good, you don't just, create a little bubble around yourself, but you actually create a spiritual flow of energy. You widen, so to speak, the channels of divine energy for yourself. So when you're thinking positive and you're trying to put yourself into a positive place, that itself is a mechanism to allow yourself access to positivity or some kind of optimistic or better future. And that's an extremely important part of this whole story. And finally, number 5 is that everything we find ourselves within, no matter what the circumstances, there's always a purpose. God always puts us in any circumstances for some kind of purpose. Sometimes we figure it out, sometimes we don't. But it's our job to search. And that's what we do. That's part of the divine plan, is for us to try to find godliness in unique circumstances, and that's part of the experience. So those are the 5 mindsets, and I don't think that I've said anything here that's completely beyond anybody's knowledge level or anything like that. This is all pretty basic to Judaism, and it's just a matter of really living with these things, and then at the end of the day, it gave us life. So to go back a little bit in our story, our oldest son was born. My wife and I were actually married in 2003, and my oldest son was born in January 2005. He was a 26-weeker, so he was born 1 pound 15 ounces. He was a little guy. And in those days, that was basically a little bit on the edge of what they could do for preemies, but thank God he really scooted through without any problems whatsoever. Now he's a 15-year-old, and thank God, no problems whatsoever. 3 months or so, he was in the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit, until he was able to come home. And during that time, we met a Jewish doctor with whom we maintained a basic Chabad rabbi relationship over the years, and he became an important figure in this story. We're going to call him, for the purposes of this story, we'll call him Ralph. He was a neonatologist, and we'd bring him a Purim basket and that kind of thing. But we didn't have a very extensive relationship over the years, but we tried to maintain that relationship. So moving forward, thank God we had 4 perfectly healthy children in the interim, and my wife was pregnant with number 6. And everything was perfectly fine until she was 30 weeks pregnant, and it was on Hanukkah, and my wife was going in for her 30-week checkup. That day that she was going in for the checkup was also the day of our big menorah lighting on campus, and so it was a very packed day. So my wife went on to her doctor's appointment in the morning, kind of expecting to go in there and get out and head straight to the menorah lighting, set things up with me. And they had an ultrasound prepared for her, and they did a complete ultrasound of the entire fetus. And being that she had been a high-risk patient until that point, she saw them spending a lot of time around the baby's heart. And she called me back. She called me up on the way home. She said, "Ellie, I think there's something wrong with the baby's heart." And what do you know? A few minutes later, we get a phone call from one of the midwives, and she said, "Is your wife there?" I said, "No, she's not," but she understood that there was something wrong with the baby's heart. And she said, "Yes, there is, but I really would like to speak to her." I said, "Listen, I'm the baby's father. I'm my wife's husband. We know something's wrong. Is this baby viable?" And she kind of hemmed and hawed until finally she said, "You know what? I think the defects in this baby's heart are probably too much to be able to, for the baby to be able to live." I said, "Okay, thank you very much." And I withheld that information from my wife until after the menorah lighting program. I figured it wouldn't exactly be conducive for her to be able to run a program with 100 students if she's considering what's going on with the baby's fetus. But after the program, we called the midwife back and asked her for more details. And she said, and I don't want to give you full details, but we're going to set you up with an appointment where they'll do a complete echocardiogram and ultrasound to be able to figure out what the problems are at great length. So that's what happened. A week later, we go into this 3-hour ultrasound and echocardiogram. And afterwards, they bring us into a room. And along with us in the room, there was a cardiologist, an OB, and a social worker. And nothing in the room but a table and a box of tissues. The assumption is that everybody comes into that room has a cold. So we sit down at the table, and the cardiologist starts talking first. And she said, "Listen, there's heart disease and there's heart disease. In other words, there's a spectrum when you talk about the different types of malformations that can come up in a heart as it develops in utero. And your son is on the way extreme." And she explained as follows. She said, "There are 12 defects that would be considered critical. In other words, that they need immediate attention. Your son has 3 of the 12. And the 3 of the 12 are, first of all, total AV canal. So that means that the baby only has a right ventricle. So there's only half a heart. That itself is not nearly as big a deal as the next 2 issues. The next 2 issues are pulmonary atresia and total anomalous pulmonary venous return. And what those 2 are, pulmonary atresia means that the pulmonary valve doesn't exist. It's just a simple piece of skin. And the problem with that, of course, is that's the valve that allows the heart to be able to pump blood to the lungs. And so there's no way for the heart to be able to pump blood to the lungs. And total anomalous pulmonary venous return is that the veins that carry blood from the lungs back to the heart are in the wrong place. So instead of going from the lungs to the heart, they went from the lungs to the liver, if I remember correctly. So basically, with this confluence of major problems, she told us we need to get him into surgery immediately. There's no guarantee that he'll survive. In fact, we don't really have that much literature on children with this confluence of problems that have survived, but we need to get him into surgery right away. So I was actually thrilled by that. You said that there's surgery. You said that there's something for us to do. Let's fight. We've got a battle to wage. Let's go for it. And then the OB started speaking. She said, "Well, besides for the cardiac problems, there's also major GI problems." She said, "We're not exactly sure what we're seeing on the ultrasound, but it seems that there's either esophageal fistula or esophageal atresia, which means that either the esophagus and the trachea are either fused or they don't reach the stomach." And she said, "We can't find a stomach on the ultrasound, so we don't know if he has a stomach." So with those major GI problems on top of the major cardiac problems, I'm sorry, there's really nothing for us to do. So, with that kind of attitude, obviously we were, thank you very much for rolling us over with a steamroller. And we walked out, obviously crushed, but with an attitude that we need to feed ourselves into something. We have a direction, and that direction came from Judaism. Direction came very, very clearly from Judaism, and specifically the Hasidic outlook on life. I forgot to mention, at the menorah lighting, I spoke, of course, in front of the menorah, and I said that this menorah reminds us that God did miracles in those days and does miracles in these days. So I was really not speaking to the crowd, I was really speaking to myself. But those were, for myself, those were like fighting words in order for me to be able to kind of focus myself and focus my outlook and my mindset on what was going to go on in the future. We knew very, very, very clearly that we needed a miracle. We also felt very, very clearly that we weren't worthy of one, but we felt like we had to do everything we possibly could to be able to be there to receive a miracle if God decides to give us one. So with that was the positive approach that we took. In other words, we knew that practically speaking, there was no way for this child to be able to survive. In other words, when you have the issues of pulmonary atresia and total anomalous pulmonary venous return, there's no real way for the baby to be able to breathe, even when he's born. So we understood with all of those pieces that the chances of this baby surviving were extremely low, if not nil. But at the same time, again, God is fully capable of doing whatever he wants. And so therefore, the question is, what can we do to be able to put ourselves in the circumstance to be able to receive the miracle if God decides to give us a miracle? So with that approach, we took several outlooks. Now, we said, number one, we need to prepare ourselves spiritually. And one of the things that we do spiritually is we check our mezuzot. The mezuzot, of course, that we have on all of our doors need to be kosher. And the Rebbe oftentimes told people when they were going through some kind of crisis, check your mezuzot. So we got our mezuzot checked, and what do you know? One of the mezuzot was not kosher. The words that were flawed in this mezuzah were the words bincha, which means your son, and levavchem, which means your heart. So, okay, there's obviously something going on over here, but we still have a lot more to do. Well, number two is to look for the Rebbe always told people, or often told people, to look for a second opinion. So he sent off his scans to Boston Children's, which is one of the best pediatric cardiology programs in the country. And they came back to us and said, we agree with the team in Seattle. There's really nothing to do. And the words that he used in his email were surgery would be futile. And that word still kind of sticks in my craw. So, okay, we struck out again. Number three is to speak to a friend who's a doctor. And so this is where we walked over to this guy, Ralph, because we knew that Ralph worked both at Seattle Children's Hospital as well as the University of Washington Medical Center, which was where my wife was going to give birth. And so we figured he would be our friend who we can reach out to be able to get his perspective. Maybe we'd be able to find some kind of unique new technology that would be able to help us, or he would see something on the scans that would be a unique way of looking at things. And we asked him if he'd be willing to talk to us and to be able to be, if possible, an ally or an advocate of sorts. So he agreed, and we sat down and he described everything that's going on. And he said, listen, there's really no chance for this kid to survive. And even if he does survive, his quality of life will be virtually nil. I said, okay, stop right there. Quality of life is completely subjective. Here in Miami, you have some guys, if their Rolls Royce got scratched, their quality of life is over. That's the way it is here, right? But the fact is that life itself has this infinite value. And so therefore, if there's anything that I know, is that as a parent, it's my job to protect my child's life as best as possible. And however long God allows this child to live, that's God's deal. And I'd love to try to find any way for to be able to heal him if that's at all possible. And, we went back and forth on this idea. And he finally, he seemed like he agreed with me at some point. And I said, well, will you be willing to advocate for us? He said, if you'd allow me access to the files. I said, please do. We'd like to get an advocate. He said, sure. Oops. So during this time, we were also going to OB visits every single week. And at the OB visits, you had the OB who had diagnosed us in utero, but you also had a Jewish social worker who was there, who actually had come to one of our Shabbatons many years before that. And she, being Jewish, she felt, kind of responsible for us somewhat, and she was trying to help us, but in a very backwards way. She would ask us every single time, so what have you done to prepare for the baby's last minutes? And we'd say, that's not our approach. We're not taking that approach. And then she'd ask us again, well, would you like me to call the Chevra Kadisha, the Jewish Burial Society? Or would you like to call the Jewish Burial Society? Now that's a psychological manipulation that my mother used to try on me. Not the burial society part, just to clarify, the idea of basically, well, would you like me to do it or are you going to do it? And that kind of thing. And I obviously saw straight through it. And I said, listen, we Jews are obsessed by life and we're completely focused on life. And that's what we're focused on. And if God decides to take this child early, we'll accept that when and if it comes, but that's not what we're focusing on here. And every single time we try to explain that, the doctor and the social worker would look at us like we were completely delusional. I don't exaggerate when I tell you it would take us days to recover from every one of these doctor's appointments. When you're trying to keep yourself positive, you're trying to keep yourself afloat, and you're just being shoved under by the medical professionals. It was really, really, really difficult. So during that time, we actually had a very special experience. And that was, of course, Mrs. Shapiro. Mrs. Shapiro, Chaya Shapiro, and my wife, whose name is Chaya Rachel, they're friends going back to high school. And they're also part of a society that's called the Ashrenu Society, which was a group of Chabad and campus women that get together every so often. They'd speak a couple times a month and give each other support and, give each other ideas and whatnot. And they were planning on going to Los Angeles for a winter break. And my wife said, listen, I'm sorry, guys, I can't come to Los Angeles because, the doctors want me to stay here and they don't think the baby's going to be able to survive. And so Chaya and the other friends in this group decided, instead of saying we're going to go to Los Angeles anyway, they all decided to fly out to Seattle. And they spent 3 days together with my wife, gave her just a tremendous amount of joy just being with her. And apparently when she came back to Flagstaff, she was so upset by our predicament that she said to Rabbi Shapiro, she said, we need to do something for them. And, apparently it just went to, well, what can we do for them? They decided to raise money for us. And now when Rabbi Shapiro, and this is not actually part of the story that I usually tell everybody publicly, but being that Rabbi Shapiro is here, it's worth it to repeat, at least to embarrass him a little bit.
Chaya.
So when Rabbi Shapiro told me, he asked me, do you mind if we raise, do a small little fundraiser for you guys, maybe $10,000 or something like that. In my own head, I thought, well, I guess that'll pay for the funeral. And that was really if you want to raise money for us, we certainly needed it at the time. Being Chabad on campus, you're not exactly rolling in dough. But it was an incredible gesture to us. And they not just ended up raising $10,000, they ended up raising something more on the lines of $60,000. And the incredible divine providence of this, he called me up. He said, okay, we decided that the day that we're going to do this matchathon and fundraiser is going to be February 5th and 6th. Excuse me, February 7th and 8th. And the reason why that was shocking to us is because that was the date that my wife was planned to go to be induced. And while the baby was being born, people were giving thousands of dollars in charity to us, which itself was just really, really incredible. We weren't able to focus it on the time because we were completely focused on the baby himself, but just that part of the story is really, truly remarkable. And my thanks to Rabbi Shapiro is beyond what I can possibly express. And my thanks to Chaya for being what a true friend is versus what I'll describe to you what this doctor did to us, is unbelievable. A true friend stands up, and even when you don't ask for help, provides it. And that's just one of these just really incredible parts of this story. In any case, Dr. Ralph started basically getting on top of us as well, telling us that we need to plan for the baby's last moments and that kind of thing. And I said, listen, that's not the approach we're taking. But at the same time, being that we are, Jews have a certain responsibility. And I wanted to make sure that whatever that would happen when this baby is born, that I fulfilled the responsibility, my responsibility as a father for this soul, for this baby's soul, 100%. And I finally agreed to sit down with Ralph and with a rabbi to be able to make sure that I had all of my halachic corners covered and that I was going to do everything I possibly could. So we sat down with the rabbi, his name is Rabbi Farkash, and Rabbi Farkash kind of interrogated Ralph about the situation and said, listen, are you absolutely sure about your diagnosis? He said, absolutely. What about the prognosis? Is there any chance that what you're seeing is wrong? He said, no. We see everything on the ultrasound. I'll have to say it's 99% correct because I'll give you 1%. But he said, well, is there any chance that this baby could survive whatsoever? He said, look, because of the baby's anatomy, the chances that the baby can breathe and actually will survive birth is extremely low. If the baby survives birth, that'll be surprising, but there's even lower chance that the baby will survive any testing that we do afterwards to be able to evaluate it. If he survives that, he definitely will not survive the ambulance ride from the University of Washington Medical Center to Seattle Children's where they would do surgery. If he happens to survive that, he will absolutely die on the operating table. And if he doesn't, there's no question that he'll be a vegetable and die soon afterwards. So Rabbi Farkash said, so you're telling me that medically there's nothing to do? He said, that's correct. There's nothing to do. So Rabbi Farkash said, well, if there's nothing to do, then you don't have to do anything just to say you did something. But you need to know that according to halacha, there are two things you need to know. Number one, you may not withhold air or food. So that means that if you put him on oxygen and that's how he's living, you cannot take him off oxygen. And if you need to make sure to feed the baby, if there's some way to be able to give him nutrition, you're not allowed to starve the baby. Great. I said, thank you very much, Rabbi. And I turned to Ralph. I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to prepare for the birth as if the baby can survive. Because if there's any chance whatsoever that, God will do a miracle, we want to be able to be there to receive it. He said, okay, that's actually no problem, because there's a small hole that's between the heart and lungs that's called the patent ductus arteriosus, the PDA, and the PDA usually closes right after birth. And if we give him a medicine called prostaglandin, we can keep the PDA open for an extra hour, 2 hours or something like that. And that way we'll be able to do some more testing and we'll see if there's any new information. If there's new information, then we'll act on that. I said, great, that's exactly what I want. So we agreed. My wife would be induced. We'd have an x-ray and an echo team there to be able to check everything out, to be able to see whatever we possibly could, and we'd go from there. And so this was basically 9 weeks from when we first got the diagnosis till when the baby was born. So those 9 weeks, with the exclusion of those 3 days that my wife spent with Chaya, were unbelievably dark and very, very, very intense as you're praying, you're doing whatever you possibly can for this unborn child, but at the same time, you're like, okay, why should I deserve anything, out of the ordinary? And I still don't have any good answer to that. The one thing I did pray is basically, God, if you do give me this blessing of life for this child, I'll be able to praise you. I'll be able to thank you. And so that's the reason, of course, why I tell this story. During that time, we had a conversation or several conversations about what to call the child. And there are different ways that, in Judaism, it can be done. But my wife came across the idea that we wanted to name this child Netanel or Nesanel, because that means God gives. And she said, I want to feel that however long this child lives with whatever the issues are, this is from God, and that's the feeling that I want to have. And so therefore, that's the name I wanted to give him. And that was the name that we decided to. And so Sunday night, February 7th, we went into the hospital. Very, very different than all the other children being born, with a tremendous amount of fear and trepidation. And the next morning, things started in somewhere around 12 o'clock, and 12:47, the baby was born. The first piece of good news was that he came out, he cried. So I was thinking, okay, we've got something going on here. They gave him prostaglandin, they suctioned him, brought him over to the other side of the room, they're working on him. And after about an hour, they bring the baby back to me, and he looked obviously a little bit purple, because typically single ventricle kids, they have the issue with oxygenating blood. So therefore they have more, they're not oxygenating properly. So they look a little bluish or purple. And they bring the baby back over to me, and my wife and I are just taking turns holding the baby, singing to him. Here feeling is basically, if this baby only has a maximum, as we were told, 4 to 6 hours to be able to live, let's try to give the baby as much as we possibly can in this time. And we're holding the baby. Dr. Ralph comes back after a little while, and he was on nasal prongs at the time, giving him a little bit of oxygen, takes the nasal prongs off and says, "This baby will not live to see sunset tonight." And I remember thinking, the words went through my head saying, "Who do you think you are? God gave permission to doctors to heal, not to predict." And I looked at the kid, and my thoughts said, "Come on, kid, make it past sunset. At least that. At least make it into tonight." That was the prayer was, if you get him into tonight. So we're holding him. Nightfall comes and goes, and the baby's still busy sucking on a pacifier. He's got no problems whatsoever. He's very, very chill baby. And we were told that there's a 6-hour window to get him into surgery, and he's not going into distress. He's not, we had been described at length what it looks like when, God forbid, a baby dies and the baby's still alive. So I called the nurse over. I said, "Can you go call a cardiologist? He's still alive, so obviously you've got something wrong." And she kind of looked at me strange, and I said, "Listen, don't look at me as a grieving dad. I want you to look at him from a clinical perspective. He looks really good. Why are we not getting him into surgery?" So she called, instead of calling a doctor, she called the NICU charge nurse. And the NICU charge nurse came, and we had a really weird conversation, because she said, basically, she's like, "What do you want?" I said, "Well, let's go call a doctor to see what's going on." She said, "Well, if you want to go to Children's Hospital, you need to get in an ambulance and go right now." I said, "Well, what's the plan?" She said, "Well, they're not going to do anything besides for what they did this morning." I said, "Well, obviously this morning the testing we didn't give us any new information. So we need to do other testing, and I don't know what other testing there is." She said, "Well, there is no other testing." I said, so why are you telling me we can go to Children's Hospital? What to go for what?" She said, "Well, is that your choice?" I said, "What's my choice?" And she said, "Well, you either go right now or you don't go." I said, "Well, if there's nothing to do there, then there's nothing to do." And this is like, she said, "Okay, so you don't go." Okay, what? So this was this really strange conversation. The night progressed, and around 2 o'clock in the morning, the baby pooped. So I said to the nurse, I said, "He pooped, he must have a stomach." She said, "No, it just means that he has intestines." I think, even though I do not have a medical degree, I think I was correct. But the next morning, I said, "Well, we need to get him onto some kind of nutrition. We need to get him, either put him on IV or something like that." And she said, "Well, if he has a 24-hour fat reserves. So if he survives to tomorrow morning, we can discuss it, tomorrow morning." I said, "Well, 12 o'clock on the button. If he's still alive, we're getting him onto IV." She said, "Okay." Well, he survived to the next morning. My wife had a freaky nightmare somewhere around 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the morning. She was sleeping. She's holding the baby, and she had a nightmare that Dr. Ralph had grabbed the baby and was running away from her down the hallway of the hospital. And she woke up from this nightmare. And so it was this kind of strange messaging, so to speak, on the subconscious going on. But we wake up the next morning, and the baby wakes up, and he's fine. We haven't fed him at all. And I said, let's get him, let's do something. She said, "Well, Dr. Ralph is coming back to see you." I said, "I don't want to see Dr. Ralph anymore. All the doom and gloom, and he's coming back." I said, "Okay, fine. He wants to come back." So he comes back around 12 o'clock. And he starts talking to us, with this gloom. I said, enough. What do you have to tell us? He said, well, we looked at the scans yesterday and we realized, I told you that this cardiac disease oftentimes comes with bigger issues. Seems like he has something called heterotaxy. Heterotaxy means the internal organs are either flipped upside down, backwards, or doubled. And so actually, the baby does have two right sides. So he might have a stomach. So if you want, you can try to feed him. Now, you tell a Jewish mother, if you want, you can try to feed your child. What kind of dumb thing to say. Yes, we want to feed our child. Get out of the room and we're going to feed the child. So you fill up a little syringe with 5 milliliters of sugar water, put it in his mouth. He drinks it down and gives us a look like it's about time you finally feed me. And, we go up to 10 milliliters, no aspirating, no choking, no coughing. So he's eating perfectly fine. He pooped. Why are we not getting him into surgery? And we just couldn't get an answer to this question. And we said to Ralph, when we had another conversation, we said, can't you call Children's and tell him he's doing great? She said, well, there are 2 surgeons there. One will operate on anybody. I don't trust him. And the other one, I'll call and see what he has to say. Like, great. In the meantime, we didn't know this. And we found out from the charge nurse at Seattle Children's, he called Children's Hospital. They were waiting for us. We were on their stork list. He called them, told them that we refused invasive care and we were going into palliative and hospice care. And in the meantime, he told us that Seattle Children's refused his case because it was too extreme. So that was how things went from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Wednesday, my wife comes in, the baby's still alive. And of course, every so often he turns a little bit purple. And so we start massaging him. And that was just how it was. You're just holding this baby, terrified that any moment he might die. And that there's no medical care being given. In the meantime, they're trying to push us out of the labor and delivery ward to get us into hospice care. But we keep on telling them, no, we don't want hospice care. We want medical care. And we're just not getting it. So my wife's old OB comes up and she says to my wife, she says, you've been in this bed since Sunday night. You need to take a walk. My wife says, can I hold the baby? Now, usually my wife's attitude with regards to birth and children is, listen, she says to me, I held him for the last 9 months, you hold him. But with this baby, she was basically, not letting anybody touch him besides for me. And, it was only to get herself a little bit of a break that she would give the baby to me. She said, she said to the OB, can I go, take a walk with the baby? So the OB says, yeah, but you won't be able to leave the labor and delivery ward because of the baby's security anklet. My wife says he doesn't have a security anklet. The OB stopped, she looked down, and without saying another word, she marched out. 5 minutes later, the nurse comes back and she says, he wasn't accepted as a patient until now. So they hadn't given him a security anklet because they were so expecting him to die any moment. What was the point? By that point, we were already, we needed to call him something. So we decided to call him, instead of Nisanel, which is a little bit long, we decided to call him the nickname Nissi. And we chose the nickname Nissi because it means my miracle. And we told all the doctors, all the nurses, we weren't seeing any doctors, all the nurses, all the personnel that we were seeing, they'd say, oh, what's his name? We'd say Nissi, it means my miracle, because that's what we're asking for. And so that's, even nowadays, his nickname is Nissi. Make a long story short, Wednesday night, they really wanted us out of the labor and delivery ward. They shoved us into the NICU, not to get us any care, but because they wanted us out of the labor and delivery ward. And there was a couple of remarkable things that happened there. Number one was the nurse that we had during the past 3 days. She brought us there and she's setting everything up and she's fluffing the pillows and she's making sure my wife is comfortable and, spending a little bit extra time. And I see it, she gets up from fluffing the pillows. She looks up and I see her face is covered with tears. And she says, everybody forgets in these circumstances to say it, but I just want to tell you, congratulations, he's beautiful. And she gives my wife a hug and she walks out. And there was this beautiful moment of humanity in the insanity that we were going through with this nurse who was willing to say that. And so that was a really special, special, special moment. The next nurse, the NICU nurse, comes in and she introduces herself. She says, hi, my name is Danny. And she's all chirpy. And she says, she sees we're, of course, Orthodox Jews. And she says, do you happen to know Josh Newsom? I said, of course we know Josh Newson. Josh Newson was a student at the University of Washington, spent every single Shabbat at our house for 4 years straight and became observant himself. And so he was a very, very good friend of mine. I said, of course we know Josh. She says, oh, he's my brother. It's like, maybe you are the reason why we're going through this experience. So he spent time with her talking about, Judaism and Judaism's view of life and the value of her job as a nurse and the beauty of what nurses do and the beauty of the job of the nurse in the NICU to be able to help human beings develop as much as possible and all the, those kinds of things to be able to inspire her to take on a mitzvah, to whatever it was. And so that was that first kind of feeling. But that night was completely insane. Again, no assistance, no medical assistance whatsoever. So by the time we woke up the next morning, we realized we needed to leave the hospital. So at 9 o'clock in the morning, I called over the charge nurse, who I actually remembered from when my oldest son was there. And I said, okay, we're ready to leave. Please give us the discharge papers. We need to go. She said, you have to sign into hospice care. I said, we're not signing into hospice care. She said, you have to. I said, why do I have to? She said, because if you don't, when the baby dies, there's going to be a police investigation and you're going to be held responsible. I said, fine, sign me into hospice care just so I can get out of here. She said, okay, well, here's morphine for his last moments. I said, stop. I wasn't trained to administer morphine. I have 5 little kids at home. I'm not taking that stuff home. She said, you have to take it. I said, you can't force me to, and I'm not going to take it home. She said, okay, fine. She hands me a bright green piece of paper, and she says, sign this. I said, what's this? She says, it's a POLST. A POLST stands for Physician's Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment. And actually, it's the exact opposite of what it sounds like. A POLST is basically a do not resuscitate form. And I said, no, I'm not signing a DNR. I said, we've been fighting to try to get this child medical care. I'm not signing something. She said, you have to. I said, I'm not going to. She said, okay, you need to speak to Ralph. So Ralph called. He was at a different hospital, and he says, you need to sign it. I said, I'm not going to. It's against my religion. He says, well, what happens if the cops stop you on the way home from the hospital and they see the baby blue in the back of the car? They're going to ask you, where's his DNR? I said, that's ridiculous. Number one, because I live 10 blocks away from the hospital. Number two, I'm going to tell him because you refused to give him care. And I'm not signing the DNR because it's against my religion. He says, okay, fine. You don't have to sign the DNR. You can just take it home, but you have to take it home. I said, okay, fine. So I'm getting the stuff ready. In the meantime, the social worker comes by and she hands my wife a flowery thinking of you card. And she says to my wife, one of the most absurd things, I didn't hear it at the time, but my wife told me afterwards. She said, inside this card is the number of the Chevra Kadisha, the number of the Jewish Burial Society. We figured it will be easier for your husband to handle in a pretty card. Wasn't that so sweet? So, complete and absolute absurdity. I'm starting to get our stuff ready, and the social worker, one last thing, asks my wife, well, would you like And Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep to come? And Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep is an organization, a volunteer organization of photographers that come and take pictures of babies who, God forbid, don't make it. Now, this is not a Jewish approach at all, and from
We don't hear you. We don't hear you.
There we go. Sorry about that. I don't know how that happened. So this organization she offered to my wife is called And Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep. And it's an organization that takes pictures of babies who, God forbid, don't make it. And they do that as a service for the parents. And this is not a Jewish approach to life and death at all. It's completely macabre. And during the 9 weeks before every single OB visit, when they offered it to us, we said, no, we don't want this, kind of creepy organization to come. And they said it to my wife just as we were walking out. I didn't hear this, but they said, do you want them to come? My wife was like, you want to send a photographer? Go ahead. I'm alive. The baby's alive. Go ahead. Go for it. And so they did. And so we get home. And the first visitor of the day is a hospice care nurse. And I told her, listen, the exact opposite of what every Chabad rabbi is trained to say. I said, listen, sign those papers, get out of my house, and please don't come back. So she heard that I'm a chaplain and heard what I was saying, and she signed the papers and she walked out. I was just finishing the morning prayers. So I had my talit on. I had just taken off my tefillin, and in walks the next visitor of the day. And he's got kind of wild white hair, and I look at him, and I'm in this sarcastic mood. And I said to him, "Hey, it's Doc Brown from Back to the Future." And he looks at me like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Pardon me, I'm just wearing the Jewish security blanket. Who are you?" He says, "I'm the photographer from And Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep." I was like, "Okay." I said, "Well, do you happen to be Jewish?" He says, "Well, yes, I am." I said, "Well, would you like to put on tefillin?" He says, "If you'd allow a secular Jew to do so." I said, "It would be the greatest pleasure." And so the photographer from And Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep came to put on tefillin, and I cannot describe it in any other way other than the house lit up with light from this Jew's tefillin. From the mitzvah that this guy, that whether it was the 9 weeks that we went through was just for this guy to put on tefillin, whatever it was, but this is just this beautiful, beautiful moment of this mitzvah. And we took a picture. I'll show you a picture of it afterwards. Fast forward that night, I said to my wife, the dumbest thing I've ever said, many, many dumb things that I told her over the years. But I said, if the baby survives tomorrow morning, we'll call doctors on the East Coast or, whatever to be able to find, maybe somebody will be able to willing to take him. Now, the interesting thing is, why hadn't we made those phone calls before? And I think the answer is that we were so indoctrinated by the fact that this baby couldn't survive, even though we were focusing on the possibility of miracles and that kind of thing, we were not recognizing what was going on, and we were not sane enough. We were too just stuck in survival moment by moment to be able to really see what was going on. So in any case, the baby woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning. At this point, he was eating every 2 hours on the button. And my wife asks me to make a bottle. I stumble out of bed zombie-like, and I make a bottle, put it on the nightstand, and get back under the covers. And I hear from my wife, and Chaya can be my witness. My wife is one of the calmest women you've ever met. And she is an extremely, extremely fine personality. And that's what makes this whole thing comical, because she reacted when the nipple wasn't screwed on, so she spilled. And she said, "You didn't screw on the nipple." I said, "I'm sorry." She says, "You should be." So I'm like, okay, well, she usually doesn't talk like that, but okay. Stumble out of bed again, go get a towel, go wipe it up, clean it up a little bit, and apologize again. And she says, "You should be." And, is there anything I can do for you? No, and she's upset. Well, now I'm wide awake. And I think to myself, why the heck am I getting back in bed? I need to call doctors. So I get up, I go run upstairs to my office, and I start making some phone calls. And somebody put me in touch with a Jewish cardiologist in New York by the name of Dr. Abraham Cooper. And Dr. Cooper told me the following. He said, "You might know that Washington State was the first state to allow assisted suicide." He said, "You've been a victim of the right to die movement." He said, "If this baby is alive, I'm telling you as a cardiologist, you have the right and you have the responsibility, and there's no question that you can do something about it. You need to get him into surgery." So that was an incredible weight lifted off my shoulders. So then I started calling them more, and I realized, let me call Seattle Children's. Maybe they'll hold him in the ICU until we can get him into surgery. So I called them at 7 o'clock, and 9 o'clock, the cardiologist that diagnosed us called us back 9 o'clock on the button. And I said, "Listen, I know that things were, a little bit too complex and that kind of thing, but we'd like to get him into medical care." She said, "But we were told that you opted out of medical care." I said, "No, absolutely not. We were told that Seattle Children's refused it." She said, "Seattle Children's would never turn down a child. How quickly can you get here?" And I said, 5 minutes. We're literally, a mile away. And she says, "Well, make it 45 minutes. I've got you penciled in for an appointment. Pack up for tonight because you're going to surgery tonight." And the joy that filled us was unbelievable. So that was basically the first stage of his Wadikon. We got him into surgery over Shabbat. They did a surgery called they of course fixed the total anomalous pulmonary venous return. And they started a process called a three-stage fix of the single ventricle defect. And they put in what's called the BT shunt. And I want to tell you that because I want to kind of skip ahead to the next major miracle. And that was the BT shunt is a small tube, which is the only way for blood to be able to go between the heart and lungs. And we knew that if that shunt clotted, it would be over. So he was on blood thinners and all that kind of thing. And he was actually a week away from coming home from that surgery. And we got a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, when that phone rang, I promise you, before I was awake, I was covered in head to toe with unbelievable dread. It was unreal. And picked up the phone. They said, "We're doing CPR on your son. You need to get to the hospital right now." So we rushed off to the hospital. Got there. It's an unbelievable thing to get there 3 o'clock in the morning. The guards at the front have the doors open for you and rush straight back into the ICU. And he had already been on the post-surgical floor. And so now he was obviously sent back to the ICU, and they were still doing CPR on him when we got there. And I went onto Facebook to tell everybody what's going on because people are following the story. People are saying, praying and doing mitzvot and that kind of thing. And so I went up to Facebook to tell everybody, the update and to kind of ask people for to pray again. And I saw the most incredible message. One of my friends posted on my father's Facebook wall the following words. He said, "I just saw Rafi in a dream." And he said, "The miracle happened because he has remarkable parents." Rafi is my older brother, and he passed away in 1997. Like I said before, he had cystic fibrosis. This guy was on the East Coast, and he had this dream at the same time my son was having the cardiac arrest. So we were blown away, and we knew that something was going right, but we didn't know what. So when they stabilized him, and they went out to basically bring the baby back into a catheterization to open up the shunt again and to stent it to keep it open, we went back to the nurse that Nissi had that day to be able to thank her for saving her life, which is basically the most, how do you tell somebody thank you for saving your child's life? But, we had to. And she told us the most remarkable thing that had happened that night. She was planning on going on her lunch shift, which was at 2 o'clock in the morning. And she was watching over 4 kids because she was not in ICU. So you're responsible for 4 kids. So for her half-hour lunch, she was going to pass her 4 kids over to one of the other nurses, so that now this other nurse is responsible for 8 children. So in order to be able to make it easier, the way it works in that hospital is that, she do all of their needs, meds and all the rest of the stuff in order to be able to make it easier for this other nurse to make sure that everything was good. So my son was then on a milk pump, which had, that's how he was fed, and actually still is today. But that pump had a bag of milk that emptied out every 4 hours. So she knew that this bag would empty out. So she was planning on emptying it, but she forgot. So she goes off to take her lunch break. And in the meantime, 5 minutes later, the milk bag runs out. So there's a little alarm that goes off. Nissi nowadays imitates it all the time. Dee-dote, dee-dote, a little alarm. And so then the new nurse came in to change the milk bag. And while she was there, she looked at him. He had slipped under the blanket. So she removed the blanket from over his face, and she saw he looked gray. And she called Carly, the nurse, and said, "Does this baby always look this gray?" Carly came running over and took one look, code blue. Now, here's the thing. When you do CPR, the quality of CPR is absolutely crucial. At 2:30 in the morning, there was a respiratory therapist in the room next door. The likelihood of that happening is unbelievably low. And she came running in, they started CPR, and this girl said, she said, we think we probably started CPR before he went into cardiac arrest. And they did CPR, continuing CPR for 50 minutes, 50, while they worked to get him on ECMO. To move up a little bit, because I know I'm running a little bit late here, and I apologize for that, but basically, they got him onto ECMO, and then thank God they were able to get him off, but he was turning this deep color of blue, darker than my jacket. And they're trying to figure out why. Eventually they realized they saw air in his intestinal area, which they realized was probably from the intestine burst as a result of not having blood flow during the cardiac arrest. And so they need to rush him off to surgery once again. And I just want to say, before they did surgery, every single time we asked the surgeons to stop the team and to ask everybody in the surgical team to take on a mitzvah. And that was just a beautiful thing that they always agreed to do. So they sent him out to surgery, and we were absolutely sure at that point that that was the last time we were going to see him alive because of this intestinal surgery right after a cardiac arrest like this. It was, you know, just we didn't think, how could he possibly survive this? And 4 hours later, we're told that they're ready for us. The surgeon's going to come in. The surgeon comes into the room, throws the doors open like a gunslinger, and says it was his appendix. So the only hole in his intestine, his entire intestine, was just the tip of his appendix, which is completely remarkable. Now, scoot up a little bit further, a year and a half, and by this point he's already, you know, we've already moved to Miami, but I just want to tell this one last little anecdote. So that cardiac arrest, of course, put tremendous pressure on the heart. Now, his heart only has one valve. All the rest of us all have 4 valves, if I remember correctly, and the cardiologist here can correct me if I'm incorrect. That one valve is called a common valve. And because the heart was under pressure, the common valve is basically pushed open so that the flaps don't flap properly. They don't close properly, and that's called regurgitation because the blood is just splashing around. So we were told that eventually he would need a valve replacement. My wife did not want to replace it with a steel valve at all. She said, we've already had 1 cardiac arrest. We're not going back that direction. No more. And so she found that Boston Children's would be willing to try to repair the cardiac arrest. Repair the valve. We got to Boston Children's, and we were told there's going to be catheterization beforehand, and then we were told it was canceled. And then we went in for surgery. And the surgeon, whose name is Dr. Pedro Del Nido, is one of the top pediatric cardiac surgeons in the world. He came to us before the surgery, and he said the following. He said, your son's valve is so badly damaged that it's regurgitating over 50%. I said, you mean the heart is working twice as hard? He said that his heart is working far more than twice as hard. Now, Nissi was sitting inside a little Tykes car, you know, with his hands on the steering wheel, and I'll show the picture in just a moment, with this gigantic smile on his face. And he looks at this baby, and he says, he shouldn't look like this. He should be in heart failure. And the reason why we canceled the catheterization is because we were afraid it was going to kill him. He said, we have no idea how he looks at him. I just want to scoot across to right now. Nissi he's 4.5 now. And he just had his yearly cardiologist visit 2 days ago. And the cardiologist, who's the head of the department here at the University of Washington, at Nicklaus Children's Hospital, which is one of the top pediatric cardiologists in the country. His name is Dr. Anthony Rossi. And he looks at my wife, he goes, you know he's a miracle, don't you? And he says, his heart's looking beautiful. You know, he has other issues that he deals with, you know, in terms of the cardiac arrest caused a certain amount of delay in his mobility areas. There's a little bit of scarring in his brain from the cardiac arrest. But thank God he is just an unbelievably happy child, to the extent that even when there's pain, he gets rid of the pain. And nowadays he has a G-tube. When he was 2.5 years old, I picked him up and the G-tube got caught on a chair, which obviously you can imagine that's really, really painful because the G-tube is hooked into your stomach. And he started crying and my wife holds him tight. And after about 10 seconds, he shakes his head, picks his head up, and the tears are still wet on his face. And he says, happy now. And that was that. And so I want to give us all a blessing that we should all have the ability to be able to do that. That when we see pain, not to be able to dwell in it, but to be able to react happy now. My life is so powerful. My life is so valuable that I appreciate every moment that God gives me. And that brings me tremendous joy. So that in great short, and I apologize again for going a little bit over, that's our story. And I would love to hear questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
Rabbi Estrin, would you like to show the pictures first?
We can do that. Do you have them on your computer?
Yeah.
So you can hit share screen, and I'll quickly give you a quick, I guess, narration of what's going on in each one of these pictures. And then, like I said, I'd love to hear from any questions or any perspectives. It's a pleasure. This is Nissi when he was born. He was at this point. He was already home. But if you flip to the first picture, go back to the first. There we go. That's as soon as he was born. So you see a little bit of the purple tinge. That's before he was placed on anything.
What a beautiful baby.
That's what we thought. But go ahead to the next picture, number 2. And the second picture is just what he looked like on a regular basis. He was a happy baby. It was not a difficult baby at all. And it was just a really, really incredible thing. Go ahead, move to the next one. And there's Ralph, excuse me, not Ralph. That's Doc Brown putting on tefillin. Somewhere in the pile over there is or right behind me actually is the garbage can, which was the very first thing I did when I got home, was deposit the card with the Chevra Kadisha's phone number in it. Go ahead, next picture. That picture with my wife is one of the pictures that the photographer took of her holding. You see, he took about 15 blacks and whites, but this one, is obviously particularly poignant for us. And you can move forward. The next picture is Nissi shortly after his first surgery. His chest is still open there, so you see that's 220. So he's about 2 weeks old there. Go ahead. This picture is really powerful to me because this picture was taken at about 11 o'clock at night, the night before his cardiac arrest. So you see here, he looks really good. And so that was just an unbelievable, it was a really, really incredible setback to go there. And you go to the next picture for the cardiologist here, they can point out exactly, this is actually a scan of the cardiac arrest. I don't remember who sent that to me, but I kept it for posterity's sake, I guess. And that's his ridiculous anatomy during the catheterization after the cardiac arrest. Go ahead, next one. That was the first time we took him home. As you can see, we look more shocked than anything else, I think. But that was at about almost 5 months in the cardiac ICU. Next one. And that picture is, like I told you just right now, that was when he's sitting in the car right before his valve surgery. And next picture. That's all of us nowadays. The kid to my right is my ex-26-weeker. He's the former preemie, so you see he's not 1 pound 15 ounces anymore. And if you go to the next picture, and that's of course Nissi on top of my shoulders, shortly before his 3rd birthday. And finally, the next picture, you'll see what he looks like nowadays. Go ahead.
Hold on.
There we go. And that's what he is nowadays. He's just an unbelievably vivacious kid. He's running around. That's what we call a gait trainer, which is helping him learn how to walk. And that's his G-tube bag, with the pump behind him. But he's just a really funny and happy kid, and we're just unbelievably thankful. So that's enough of the show and tell. Please, I'd love to, answer any questions if possible.
So if anybody has a question, they could unmute themselves, or you could post in the chat box. So you click unmute on the bottom left, or you could just post in the box.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Sure.
How did your other children deal with this when you and your wife were in the hospital and you were away from them? What kind of support system did they have at home?
So we made several decisions that, thank God, were really successful in our case. Well, number one was we tried to keep their life as stable as possible. So besides for the first 4 days when we were obviously in the hospital, and at that point my in-laws were at home, watching them, But besides from that, we made sure that we were home every single night to be able to give them dinner, put them to sleep. And we were there in the morning as well to be able to bring them to school and get them ready for school. And we tried to give them as much of a normal life as possible. There was a therapist before the baby was born who told us a very, very important piece of information, that children need stability. And that was the guiding light that we stuck on. And we tried to stick to that as much as possible. It even extended itself into other areas. We wanted to make sure that even Shabbat, their Shabbat experience was completely Shabbat and was not anything different than it was. We actually had to stop doing programming because we were just too exhausted and too distracted to deal with students at the time. But even without any students or many students in our house, occasionally we had one or two, I still sang through Lecha Dodi. I danced with the kids every single Shabbat. And the point was that they should feel Shabbat. They should not lose out on any element of their childhood or their experiences, especially their Jewish experiences, just because my wife and I were stressed beyond belief. So that was our approach. And, I think the stability idea is really, really crucial. And we're very thankful for that.
I want to mention that if anyone would like to post a question in the chat, if you don't want to come onto video now, if you can't, feel free to post a question in the chat and I will read the question for Rabbi Esrin.
I have no idea what that means.
Go ahead.
So at the bottom of your screen, you could click chat and you could post the message if anyone wants to ask a question. Or you could just unmute yourself one at a time and ask.
Did the surgeons tell you any future surgery was necessary?
Okay, so we actually, the single ventricle defect has a series of 3 surgeries, so we knew that in advance. They're called the BT shunt and that the repair. That was the first one. The second one was called the Glenn, and the third one is called the Fontaine.
Yeah.
So in total, he's had 9 surgeries, between one thing and the other, because of the various, just the directions things went. But thank God we're post Fontaine. So we finished the repair up to this point. So that itself we're very, very thankful for. And we don't have any other surgeries planned for the future. So that's basically where we are. So at that point, we certainly knew there were several more surgeries in the offing. We didn't know how many there would be. And, we have no idea at this point even, what's going to be in the future. But thank God, there are no planned surgeries from here on. Somebody asked if he had been misdiagnosed. So the cardiac diagnosis was correct. However, there's a cardiologist here, and I would love to hear from the cardiologist, because I love to hear from the professionals. The misdiagnosis was definitely with regards to the GI system. What they misunderstood was the idea of heterotaxy. Heterotaxy means that, that they just didn't know where the different organs are. So his stomach, for example, is behind his liver. And so that's the reason why they couldn't find his stomach. His esophagus was at that point was large. And so that's the reason why they had a hard time being able to decipher what was going on with it and the trachea. But thank God we've had no problems with that. He had a lot of reflux, on and off over the years, and that just comes and goes. And honestly, we really don't know exactly why it works that way or why not. But the misdiagnosis was without question in regards to the heterotaxy. But I want to point out the other thing is that even with the cardiac stuff, the chances of survival were 0. And that's what, the surgeons later told us. Basically, there's no real chance to be able to survive this degree of cardiac disease without immediate medical intervention. And I pointed out to one of the surgeons at some point, I was like, it was a miracle that the PDA stayed open until Friday. And he goes, yeah. I said, what, wasn't a miracle? He goes, yeah, that was a miracle, but that wasn't the biggest miracle. I said, what do you mean? He said, the PDA is tiny. Your son had oxygen saturations in the 70s and 80s. We don't know how he had that high oxygen saturations, even with the PDA. In other words, as one of the surgeons who actually went into his anatomy, he said, honestly, this is really something that's beyond us, because physically, when we mapped out his anatomy, there really shouldn't be any way for him to be able to survive. Chaya just asked, did we ever find out who told Seattle Children's that we didn't want? We're pretty sure we did several investigations afterwards, and we're pretty certain that it was Ralph himself who told them that. And Ralph was just trying to, Ralph had pity on us and thought that it would be better for us and the child if we buried the child. And that was his mistake, was to allow his ego to control the situation as opposed to recognize the clinical situation and that the child was doing better. So that was the sadness of the situation. But yeah, it seems like it was Ralph.
I could ask a question. The doctors were, in their minds, they like Ralph and many others seem to think that they're doing you a favor by preparing you for the worst and maybe even going beyond that. So what have you learned since then from other doctors who approach it in a different way? And what is the healthy way for a doctor and a proper way for a doctor to address patients in these situations?
It's a phenomenal question. The question is from a prognosis perspective. And this actually I'm answering both as a parent and as a chaplain. You have to present the situation as you see it. But, to be able to understand that, every body is different and every system is different. And so therefore there are going to be people who beat the odds. That doesn't mean that you have to tell people that they can beat the odds, but it does mean that you can allow people to have some hope that there is some kind of capability. And there's a really, really slight balance. It's very, very slight, and it's a very difficult balance. But I believe that most practitioners get so stuck on the concept of false hope that they lose the capability of allowing people to be able to love and live life as long as it is with whatever it is, with as much joy and appreciation as possible. I think that if people are given that, instead of like, oh, I'm sorry, you've got 2 weeks left to live. I think that kind of finality is inappropriate, and it's also fundamentally flawed because, again, you don't know what's going to happen. So I do think that the best doctors that we've seen throughout our experience were the ones who were humble and cognizant that good things could happen. I'll give you an excellent example. After the cardiac arrest, of course, the worst thing that was on our mind was the issue of neurological damage. And we were talking to one of the intensivists, one of the doctors there, and she said, we don't know what's going to happen, but children have tremendous ability to be able to bounce back. She said, when I was a young doctor, there was a little child who pulled a TV down on her head. And there was tremendous brain trauma. And when they did an MRI, it was all black. And the doctors told this family that this baby would never walk or talk again. She said 2 years later, the baby ran into the ICU to say hello to her doctors. So that information was phenomenally encouraging to us, even though it had nothing to do with us. But you have some kind of what I call grip tape to be able to hold yourself on, that you can hold yourself up based on that. Basically, okay, I'm going to focus on that, and we're going to do our side, and you do your side. We're fighting together. That kind of element, this humility, the understanding that parents are already, struggling tremendously, and to give them a little bit of grip tape that look, I can't promise you anything, but we're going to do everything we can to be able to, that kind of focused hope, again, it needs to be tailored to each circumstance, but that's the way I would answer that question. It's a deep question and it's a difficult question, but I hope I answered
Thank you. So we have a few more questions over here. Starting from, does Ralph know about Nissy's miracle? And then
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. He found out very quickly. He sent me an email on Friday, asking if, I heard that he's doing so much better. I'd love to come visit you in the ICU. And my wife is like, if he shows up, I will kick him. And my wife doesn't kick people. She's just not that way. And so we had several emails back and forth. I emailed him pretty intensely. I said something like, what do you tell somebody who saved one of your children but tried to kill another one? And, I asked him if he would be willing to apologize and do several things to express his apology. And he basically said, I apologize for the breakdown in communication. And that was infuriating. So unfortunately, we have never gotten a proper apology from him. And every year, every so often, usually around Nissy's birthday, I send him a picture of Nissy just to remind him who's boss. God's boss.
So do you see the other questions?
You want me to check him? There we go.
So the next question is, did you ever
Right.
bring Nissy back to see Dr. Ralph and the staff? Did you bring him back to the hospital at all?
I brought him back. My wife did not want to. She had PTSD every time we drove past that hospital. Before we left Seattle to move to Miami, I decided that we needed to. I did not want to see Ralph, but we went back to the labor and delivery room to see the nurses and to show them the kid. And we also went to the NICU to return the DNR. So that was a little bit of the chutzpah on my part. Basically, hey guys, sorry, we didn't need this. You can have it back. It was just, so we did that. And, I was very, very beyond happy to walk out of that building for the last time.
Next question is your son able to eat normally?
He, interestingly enough, over the past several months, he has started to eat. Before that, well, he was eating before his valve repair and then he stopped. And there's something called eating aversion that sometimes happens after cardiac surgery, heart surgery, and we don't necessarily know why. And he just was not eating, and that's just what eating's overrated anyway. So just, you try to get him to eat a little bit here and a little bit there, and then basically over the past few weeks, very suddenly he started eating. I mean, he's very, very, very little, so when we're talking about, like today we had pizza for dinner and, he probably nibbled off the top, shall we say, 4 millimeters or so of the pizza. And I'm done, that kind of thing. But he's actually, we're hoping that basically by the time he's married, he might be off the G-tube. We have things to look forward to, so.
So did the hospital fail protocol when they did not place a wristband after the birth of Nissy?
They failed protocol all the way through, but the strangest thing about it was that when we did these series of investigations, they did nothing but try to protect Ralph. And here's something I completely forgot about when I told you the story. When we went home from the hospital the first time, I asked them if we could borrow a car seat because we hadn't brought a car seat with us because we didn't expect to need a car seat, either surgery or, God forbid, the other option. They said, you don't need one. And they sent us home without one. So, when they concluded their investigations by saying that he did not fail NICU protocol, I was furious with that because I said, you sent us home without a car seat. That is state law. That's not NICU protocol. I know that that's wrong, but they just did whatever they possibly could to protect him. And at some point, it was only after we did a Washington Medical Board investigation, and they concluded that there were mistakes made, but the hospital punished him in-house and so therefore they weren't going to do anything about it. And considering that the University of Washington is the state of Washington's biggest employer, that probably had a lot to do with what was going on there. But all things considered, eventually when we threatened to go to the media, they finally agreed to change certain protocols or to make certain protocols. So I sent them a list of protocols I wanted changed. They said they did it, and I didn't have the energy to fight anymore. Somebody just asked about medical malpractice. Thank God there's no malpractice to fight because of the fact that we have no damages, because he's doing so well. The legal standard that you look for in medical malpractice is called standard of care and damages. And basically we wouldn't really have anything to win, with both of those considered. So we're just lucky. That's all. At the end of the day, it's just we're lucky.
If you could share his full Hebrew name, so if anyone would like.
It's Netanel ben Chaya Rachel, Nesanel ben Chaya Rachel. When you say prayers or you say Tehillim, you can say it with a tremendous amount of joy and thanks. That's really what it is. It's a huge amount of thanks, and it's something that obviously goes out, to each one of the kids. This is.
Can I say something?
Sure, please.
There's a child, there's a baby, actually, who's in Arizona right now. He was born maybe about 4 months before Pesach, and his name right now is Tinok ben Chaya Rachel.
Oh gosh.
Well, wait
really
a
strange.
second. He had a valve replacement, and he still did not get a Brit Milah.
Right.
He just came home from the hospital, and I don't know. Chaya Rachel, I think.
That's very, very interesting. So you can tell that family what we learned was that we were told to name him at a Torah because he was not expected to get a bris for a long time, and he actually only had his bris at the same time that we did the G-tube, and he was 2.5 when we finally did the bris in surgery with a moel and a surgeon at the same time. So therefore, he was named at a Torah scroll. Even though we'd been calling him Nesanel before that, but you can definitely tell that family that they can name him at a Torah. That was the instructions that were given by Rabbi Feitel Levin, who's a very, very well-known halachist. So it's,
even before the Brit Milah.
Absolutely. I mean, especially because we knew that the bris wasn't going to be, if ever, it was going to be years later. And thank God we were eventually able to do it when he was 2.5.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Absolutely. And there's that Tinok ben Chaya Rachel sounds very, very familiar for 2 reasons. My oldest son was, as a preemie, was Tinok ben Chaya Rachel for a very, very long time, for 3 months. And now he's Yehuda Rafael ben Chaya Rachel. So it's very, very powerful to hear that. So please send the parents our best and tell them if they need to get in touch with us, we'd be happy to talk to them.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Everyone could unmute themselves in a moment. I just want to say a huge thank you to Rabbi Eli Eshrin for sharing this very personal story. And more than ever, we need these positive stories and messages, and just to recognize that Hashem runs the world, and to always stay positive. And you and your wife, Chaya Rachel, really exemplified that throughout all of this and continue to do that. And thanks for sharing your story with all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So we all wish many more blessings for Nissi and all of your children.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Any final questions or comments?
Can I ask a quick one? Do you
Please.
find yourself giving support to other couples with medical challenges, since it is so hard on the relationship?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And in fact, my wife and I just finished writing a book of Nissi stories with tips for families and doctors and friends of families. That at the end, we just finished writing the book itself. We're working with a publisher, to get it published, God willing. But yeah, we every so often friends call us and say, would you like to speak to somebody? We try to give whatever advice we can and support that we can. So
Beautiful.
Oh,
Jerry, you have a question? It looked like it.
Jerry? We're missing somebody over here?
You're on mute. We can't hear you. So, no, I think that's it. Oh, there you go.
I want to say thank you, Rabbi. That was an amazing story that you can verbalize that so often when it's such an emotional thing. And it's very inspiring. I just found out this morning that one of my best girlfriends was admitted into the hospital for COVID. And this is the first person that is in my life circle who's come down with the virus. And Rabbi Shmulek told me to make sure I was going to be on tonight to hear your story. I was planning on anyways, but it's so incredible that God has so much control in people's lives and they don't realize it. And I am so I'm speechless. I can't understand how people can't be with God, and even with all the negative things against you that happened with the doctors and the hospitals, and the child survived and is what I would consider thriving. And I want to Baruch Hashem and good luck, and I hope that Nissi has a full, long, and productive and happy life with lots of love.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you.
Amen.
And I hope that your friend has a complete and absolute recovery, speedy, without any impact, God willing.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Damn.
well, thank
All
you
right. Thank
again,
you, everybody.
Rabbi Eli. And you're always welcome to come out to visit after COVID passes. And
we are looking forward
love
to
have
it.
you come join us here in Flagstaff, and we'll all welcome you very warmly.
We're looking forward
You
to
and Chaya Rachel, and if you're able to bring anyone from the family, even better.
We're coming out. We're coming in by ourselves. Anyway, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you. This was incredible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating, inspirational.